Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. In an effort to ensure that all Albertans have access to water this spring and summer, the province has unveiled water-sharing agreements. Israel has retaliated following a recent missile attack by Iran. TBN Israel's correspondent Yair Pinto will have the latest for us. And with the recently released federal budget, political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilly weighs in on if there were any surprises.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Major water users in southern Alberta have agreed to curb their consumption if there's a severe drought this spring or summer. The 38 licensees which signed the deals with the province covered 90% of the water allocated in the Bow and Old Man basins and 70% in the Red Deer River Basin. Environment Minister Rebecca Schultz says it won't be known whether the agreements need to be acted upon until snowpack information comes in later this month. Officials announced water sharing agreements covering 4 subbasins, the Red Deer River, the Bow River, along with the Old Man River. Now, participating municipalities have agreed to cut their water consumption by between 5 and 10% if needed. And Schultz says some have already begun doing so.
They will let municipalities, First Nations, industry, and other water users receive their water, and irrigation districts will divide up the remaining supply for growing crops and feeding livestock. If it sounds complicated, that is absolutely because it is. Water is used by many people in many different ways, pulling from many different points within our system. Starting in May, we will evaluate and update the actual water use and conservation measures that users take every 2 weeks, so that we're adjusting water based on how much is actually available at any given time.
The Alberta Irrigation Districts Association says farmers have had to make tough decisions about which crops to allocate water to in the short term, and many are looking to focus on higher value ones like potatoes and sugar beets as opposed to grain. Well, the water sharing agreement is a proactive measure also being carried out here in Lethbridge. It will combat the drought conditions that we may experience later this summer. Joel Sanchez, Director of Infrastructure and Services for the City of Lethbridge, announced that for this, they'll make sure they work together to reduce water consumption by 10% this summer. The measure will begin in May and will remain until September of this year.
Agreements between the largest license holders in the province to draw water from the river or the reservoirs. And these agreements are first time that they are being in place or being put together. The last resort that we're waiting for is measurements of the snowpack that will be available at the end of this month. Water conservation and the water rationing plan. Once the agreements are in place or activated, then we will move to stage 1, and that could happen as soon as beginning of May of this month. It is also important to mention that the city is a regional provider of water. It's not only for the city of Lethbridge, but we also provide to surrounding communities around the city, like Coaldale, Cornhurst, Picture Butte, the county of Lethbridge.
Canada's premiers have issued a very stern warning to the Trudeau government: no overreach into their jurisdictions. Now, in a letter responding to the Liberals' budget, they said they're worried that new federal programs are eventually going to be downloaded onto provinces and territories. They also say the housing crisis cannot be solved by Ottawa working with municipalities alone. The premiers have said they need to be able to be at the table to help develop housing programs. Alberta NDP finance critic Shanna Phillips has been very vocal about the United Conservatives' proposed Bill 18, also known as the Provincial Priorities Act. The UCP say the bill is to support the government and pushing back against overreach by the feds. Phillips, however, says the bill, if passed, could have a damaging ripple effect.
Millions of dollars that comes into the University of Lethbridge and Lethbridge College every year. It is a real threat to economic development funds as well into EDL. It is a real threat to the money that comes into our cities and to a lesser extent our county. And it is a real threat to tourism organizations and other organizations like that that do benefit from funding from Prairies Can, and where those researchers might be conducting research down here as well. And that is to say nothing of what happens at our technical institutes, at our polytechnics, at our regional colleges. And then there is the effect on nonprofits, housing authorities, seniors groups, some of them, certainly Indigenous organizations, and the school boards.
The Pembina Institute think tank says it has found no evidence that Alberta has acted on its year-old plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It found the province did not launch the public consultations required to move its economy toward the goal of net zero emissions. The plan promised to keep reducing Alberta's methane emissions, but Premier Daniel Smith's government opposes federal measures aimed at doing so. Well, we had a cooler day today, again in Lethbridge, far below our seasonal values for this time of year. Jeanette Rocher is now with a quick peek at the forecast. Jeanette, how about the weekend? How's it shaping up so far?
Yeah, not bad at all, Hal. We are seeing lots of sunshine, and the good news is that Mercury is starting to slowly climb. So by Sunday, we're going to be up in the double digits again before getting up into the teens and even closing in on 20 degrees later on next week. Now, this evening, we are still seeing some chilly conditions. Overnight low of -10 with the wind chill going to feel more like -15. That's going to last into Saturday morning. And then we're going to see a daytime high Saturday of 9 degrees, clear skies with winds from the south, 20 gusting to 40 kilometers per hour. And I'll be back later into the show to let you know how the rest of the forecast is looking.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. Federal Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland tabled the federal government's budget on Tuesday. Now, political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilly gave us his thoughts on the budget and if there were any surprises in Budget 2024.
Surprises on both the spending and the taxation side. We know this is a big spending government. They always put out projections, oh, we'll spend this much, and then they overshoot it. They spend more and more each year. Program spending is up $30 billion over last year. Last year, program expenses were $450 billion. This year, they're $480 billion. The deficit is going to be $25 billion more than they projected in last year's budget over the coming 5 years. They're just, instead of the budget deficit going down, it's going back up again. And then you've got the interest charges on the deficit. This is the one I always say, it's like paying just a monthly minimum on your credit card. $54 billion this year. That's more than the federal government sends to the provinces and territories for healthcare. And it's more than they collect in the GST, Hal. So that's the spending side. It's crazy. They claim they're going to pay for this by increasing the capital gains tax from 50% inclusion to 66% for corporations on any capital gain. And they'll do that the same for any individual making $250,000 in capital gains. That's going to really hit businesses, business owners, small, medium, large. They're just going to stop investing in Canada because the reward won't be there. They claim it's going to bring in $6.5 billion this year, $20 billion over the next 4 years. I don't think they're going to meet those targets, and I think it's going to really hurt the economy. This is not a budget built to get the Canadian economy back on track.
Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly and other G7 ministers met in Italy, and they co-signed a statement urging Israel and Iran to de-escalate their conflict. The final communique from the summit touched on the Israel-Hamas war, the humanitarian plight in Gaza, and Houthi rebel attacks on ships off the coast of Yemen. The ministers condemned Iran for attacking Israel with missiles that were almost entirely shot down last weekend. Worshippers in Tehran chanted slogans against Israel hours after an apparent Israeli drone strike in Iran. It came days after Tehran's unprecedented drone and missile assault on Israel.
تحرکات خاصی انجام ندادن. این رو از خبرگزاری‌ها دریافت کردیم. فکر نمی‌کنم این جرأت رو بکنن داشته باشن بعد از حمله موفقیت آمیز ایران بتونن تحرکاتی انجام بدن.
این قدم‌ها رو بیت المقدس و بین الحرمین ببینم رمز پیروزی ما یک فریاد بود همه با هم تموم شد.
Well, Israel has in fact struck back. The Israeli military has reportedly attacked an Air Force base in Iran. Iranian military said there was no damage since the drones were intercepted by the Iranian defense system. As TBN Israel's Yair Pinto explains now, the region that the IDF is targeting is home to several of Iran's nuclear sites.
According to the Fars agency, an explosion was heard in the northwest of the city near the Air Force base. In other reports, it is claimed that there were explosions near the local airport in Iran. It was also reported that civilian air traffic in the country has been disrupted. A source also told the Saudi El Had channel that a warning notice was issued regarding the existence of flights in the western region of Iran. Several Iranian nuclear sites are located in Isfahan province, including Natanz, which is considered as the country's main uranium enrichment site. The reports of the retaliatory attack in Iran, while in Israel remain silent, come at an interesting time, the 85th birthday of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. Earlier tonight, according to the Pentagon, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin spoke with Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. It was reported that the two discussed Iran's actions in the Middle East, as well as other regional threats.
Flower therapy is flourishing in the Ukrainian city of Lviv. This after the Netherlands gifted the city 100,000 tulip bulbs. The local council is hoping the flowers will bring some comfort to residents in Ukraine coping with the continuing war with Russia.
Цибулини цих тюльпанів ми висаджували в грудні. І насправді це таке диво, коли навесні вони розквітли, як символи життя. І на цьому просторі меморіалі Небесної Сотні це надзвичайно символічно.
Це така радість. І це от навіть нехай, зараз буду плакати, нехай навіть на хвилинку. Хтось забуде про війну, нехай навіть хтось на секунду забуде про те, що бомблять нашу Україну. І нехай хтось на секунду подумає собі, що коли повернуться їхні чоловіки, вони разом посадять ті квіти в себе в городі. Вдячність безмежна, дуже дякую.
Canada's Governor-General Mary Simon is set to make her first official visit to Saskatchewan next week. She's scheduled to arrive at the legislature in Regina on Monday. She'll be greeted by Premier Scott Moe, the Lieutenant Governor, and other dignitaries. Simon will also be inspecting an honor guard of troops from the RCMP training depot. Now, Premier Moe says Simon demonstrates a deep commitment to promoting unity and understanding among all Canadians. Provincial mediators are asking the union representing striking airline catering workers at Toronto's Pearson Airport to return to the bargaining table. Around 800 gate gourmet workers went on strike Tuesday, leaving thousands of passengers eating pretzels and cookies instead of full meals. Teamsters Canada says its members are willing to return to work if the company offers a living wage. One person is in hospital after setting themselves on fire outside of a courthouse in Manhattan where Donald Trump's hush money trial is taking place. Now, warning now, some of the video you're about to see you may find disturbing, and viewer discretion is advised. The incident took place moments after a jury had been seated. People rushed over to extinguish the flames before paramedics carried the person out on a stretcher. Lawyers will present opening statements on Monday before prosecutors begin laying out their case, alleging a scheme to cover up negative stories Trump feared would hurt his 2016 presidential campaign. Samaritan's Purse is sending urgently needed humanitarian aid to Sudan, where 6 million people have been displaced by violent conflict across the country. As we hear in this next story, the charity is urging prayer for these families and for their teams as they help both meet spiritual and physical needs for the people there.
Hi, I'm Dave Phillips from Samaritan's Purse. Recently in Sudan, fighting broke out between the government forces and a rebel militia group known as the Rapid Support Forces, or the Janjaweed. And this fighting has caused massive destruction across the country, and it's forced many families to flee their homes and to seek safety in the midst of all of the conflict. Here at Samaritan's Purse, we want people to know that God has not forgotten about them. And in the midst of this terrible crisis in Sudan, where over 6 million people have been displaced across the country, we want to meet those people where they are and provide urgently needed humanitarian assistance to save lives and alleviate suffering. We know that people are not forgotten about by God. And as Samaritan's Purse, we want to be there to provide the physical and spiritual aid that people need in Jesus' name. Please pray for the people of Sudan, for the families that are affected by this conflict, and especially for the children who have needs during this time.
As Christians, we're often instructed in God's Word to share the good news of the gospel with others. But for many, this can be kind of an awkward conversation. Abe Locke is a retired pastor here in Lethbridge, and he shares his thoughts on why talking with others about our faith can be difficult at times.
I think one of the problems is that we don't know our Bible. We maybe attend church once a week, and that's the extent of our Bible study. I teach a Bible study every week, and I kind of give homework and reading for the people because this is an ongoing thing. I cannot expect to talk about farming if I know nothing about farming. I can't expect to be a teacher if I know nothing about how to relate and how to communicate and how to teach. And I think that's one of the big things we're not sure of what we know. But secondly, I don't think many of us as Christians are sure of what we believe.
A Block will also give tips on the do's and don'ts of evangelism. That's coming up in the second half of our program. Well, we had some sunshine mixed with clouds and fairly cool earlier today here in southwestern Alberta, but fortunately, a warming trend is on the way and just in time for the weekend. Full weather details are coming up. You know, it's been quite cool the past few days, but the mercury should be climbing just in time for the weekend. Jeanette Rocher is in now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, for those of us who love to barbecue, we should get the steaks, sauce, and tongs ready?
Yeah, well, I don't see why not. I mean, especially later on this week, we're seeing 20 degrees. So yeah, get the barbecue ready. Maybe not so much this weekend. We're only seeing a high of 9 degrees on Saturday, 10 on Sunday, but it's going to be sunny. And then up to the teens there as we get into the work week. 13 degrees on Monday, up to 17 on Tuesday. A lovely 20 degrees is expected on Wednesday, and then 18 for Thursday. That is more like it. And that actually puts us above seasonal right now. So average high for this time of year, 14, average low, 0. 29, that was our record breaker on this day. That happened back in 1962, and the record low was minus 13 on this day back in 1951. Sun rose this morning at 6:29. Sunset this evening at 8:32. We're now sitting at just over 14 minutes of a daylight, 3 minutes longer than we saw yesterday. Okay, so on the west coast tomorrow, starting out sunny in both Victoria and Vancouver with increasing clouds throughout the day, and then we're looking at 30% chance of late afternoon showers, both Victoria and Vancouver. 13 for a high in Victoria, 15 in Vancouver. Vancouver also seeing up to 60K winds. Sunshine across the prairies tomorrow, 12 for the high in Edmonton, and 8 degrees is the expected high tomorrow in Calgary. Calgary seeing 20 to 40K winds. And then same thing for the rest of the prairies. Lots of clear skies here, beautiful sunshine, high of 7 in Saskatoon, 9 for a high in Regina, up to 40K winds there. 10 is the expected high tomorrow in Winnipeg, and up to 50K winds. Okay, we're seeing a little bit more rain as we get into central Canada. Looking at 30% chance of showers in Toronto, high of 10 degrees. Same thing for Ottawa, a nice 10 there with 30% chance of showers. Sunshine in Montreal, and then a little bit more partly cloudy as we get towards the end of the day there. 10 for a high there as well. Lots of rain expected in Fredericton tomorrow, 5 to 10 millimeters actually. 8 degrees for a high, 9 in Halifax, looking at 2 millimeters of rain. Same thing in Charlottetown, 2 millimeters rain, 8 degrees high, 20 to 40K winds all across those three cities there. And in St. John, we're looking at clear skies, 4 degrees, a little bit warmer inland, more like 8 degrees. There you have it. That is your forecast.
Drivers in both central and eastern Canada are experiencing sticker shock at the pumps as refineries switch their supply from winter to summer gas. According to Gas Buddy, prices jumped about 10 cents a litre overnight in places like Ontario. Gas Buddy's head of petroleum analysis says this price switch is normal and not the result of carbon taxes or the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. Patrick Tahan says winter gas is cheaper than summer blends due to higher butane levels. Tesla has issued a recall on some of its 2024 Cybertrucks in North America because the accelerator pedal can get stuck. The U.S. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration says close to 4,000 trucks made between November 13th of 2023 and April 4th of 2024 are impacted by the recall. It says the pedal pad on the trucks may dislodge and become trapped by the interior trim. Tesla is not aware of any collisions, injuries, or deaths linked to the issue. Olympic organizers have unveiled their strategy for using artificial intelligence in sports. International Olympic Committee officials say AI could be used to help identify promising athletes, personalize training methods, and make the games themselves fairer by improving the judging process. The strategy unveiling comes as the IOC gears up to hold the Paris Olympics in just under 100 days. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 98 points on the day to finish at 21,807. The Dow was up 211 points to 37,986. The S&P 500 was down 43 on the day to 4967, and the Nasdaq was down 319 points to 15,282. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 51 cents to 83.24 US per barrel. Natural gas was even on the day at $1.75 US. Gold was up $12.88 to $23.91.93 US an ounce, and silver was up 44 cents to $28.69 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.57 per bushel, barley's at $6.42, canola's at $13.85, and corn is at $7.92 per bushel. Live cattle were up 30 cents to $181.48. Feeder cattle were down 28 cents to $241.33, and lean hogs May contract was up $1.50 to $96.23. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 72.72 US. Recapping one of our top stories, Canada's premiers have issued a stern warning to the Trudeau government. Stop overreaching into their jurisdictions. Now, in a letter responding to the Liberals' budget, they said they are worried that the new federal programs are eventually going to be downloaded onto provinces and territories. They also say the housing crisis cannot be solved by Ottawa working with the municipalities alone. The premiers have said they need to be at the table to help develop housing programs. Apparently, there were a few surprises in the recently tabled federal budget. Political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilly will have details for us momentarily. Listen, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. Also, be sure to visit our website anytime to check out a number of stories and interviews. The federal government tabled its budget on Tuesday. The parliamentary budget officer was anticipating a deficit of around $41 billion, and apparently it won't be balanced for a number of years. Now, to chat about this budget in more detail is political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilly, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, when it came to the budget, the federal government openly shared what would be in the budget over the past week or so. Were there any surprises left?
Surprises on both the spending and the taxation side. We know this is a big spending government. They always put out projections, oh, we'll spend this much, and then they overshoot it. They spend more and more each year. Program spending is up $30 billion over last year. Last year, program expenses were $450 billion. This year, they're $480 billion. The deficit is going to be $25 billion more than they projected in last year's budget over the coming 5 years. They're just, instead of the budget deficit going down, it's going back up again. And then you've got the interest charges on the deficit. This is the one I always say, it's like paying just a monthly minimum on your credit card. $54 billion this year. That's more than the federal government sends to the provinces and territories for healthcare, and it's more than they collect in the GST, Hal. So that's the spending side. It's crazy. They claim they're going to pay for this by increasing the capital gains tax from 50% inclusion to 66% for corporations on any capital gain. And they'll do that the same for any individual making $250,000 in capital gains. That's going to really hit businesses, business owners, small, medium, large. They're just going to stop investing in Canada because the reward won't be there. They claim it's going to bring in $6.5 billion this year, $20 billion over the next 4 years. I don't think they're going to meet those targets, and I think it's going to really hurt the economy. This is not a budget built to get the Canadian economy back on track.
Brian, Stats Canada recently released the latest inflation number. Now, it came up slightly to 2.9%. What does that really mean when it comes to the key lending rate from the Bank of Canada? Will it remain status quo at 5%, or could we potentially see another increase?
What most of us are hoping for is a rate cut. And of course, you've got politicians across the country saying it's time for a rate cut. Like, this is hurting the housing sector. This is hurting small businesses. It's hurting people renewing their mortgages. And between the excess spending in this federal budget and this inflation rate bouncing up to 2.9%, mortgage index up at 25% year over year, rent increasing 8.5% year over year. This does not bode well. And the Bank of Canada made it clear that they need to be sure that inflation is under control before they start cutting rates again. The fact that, yeah, it's only 2.9%, but, food for restaurants, that's up 5.1%. Food that you and I buy, it's down to 1.9, but food overall is up 3%. You've got all these other key components that are still higher than where the Bank of Canada wants to see inflation before they do a rate cut. So you combine all of that with this inflationary spending that's in the budget, and I don't see them cutting the rate in June, maybe September, but that becomes a maybe at this point. I think we're in a wait and see holding pattern. I don't expect a rate increase, but don't expect that much anticipated, much desired cut to happen.
Alberta Premier Danielle Smith is looking at legislation to stop the Trudeau government from striking deals with municipalities and spending in areas of provincial jurisdiction. Now, Quebec is on Alberta's side, but Brian, not so much with Doug Ford in Ontario. Why not?
It comes down to how governments are perceived here. In different parts of the country, having lived and worked across the country, I can tell you there's a different perception of Ottawa in Quebec than in Ontario. There's a different perception in Alberta. In Alberta and Quebec, they're very similar in some ways, politically, very different in others. But when it comes to the relationship with the federal government, they're both a bit antagonistic. And the population is as well. It's not just the political leaders. And so Danielle Smith can say, we're going to do this. I wouldn't be surprised if Scott Moe does something similar. It used to be that all of the premiers would say, no, stay out of our jurisdiction. In Ontario, the consensus appears to be among voters, we don't care who does it, just do it. And they want to see all governments acting in all areas. It makes no sense to me. It would be like Doug Ford deciding, well, I'm going to increase spending on the military since Justin Trudeau won't, and I'll raise an Ontario regiment, and we'll buy helicopters and tanks. You would look at, the Ford government tried that, or the Danielle Smith government tried that. People would look and say, that's crazy. But the Trudeau government, they're obsessed with spending in provincial jurisdiction areas. The Bloc Québécois was up on their hind legs, and rightly so, in question period earlier this week, asking about this and saying your housing plan underfunds us and it doesn't spend in the areas that we want. You need to stay out of Quebec's jurisdiction. The Legault government feels much the same way, but there are certain areas of the country, I would say Manitoba, Ontario, parts of Atlantic Canada, where, okay, spend it on provincial jurisdiction. We don't know the difference and we don't really care, is kind of the ethos.
Yeah, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith keeps telling Justin Trudeau, stay in your lane. That seems to be a common theme here in the province. Now, the Trudeau government, Brian, rebranded the carbon tax rebate, which is going out to various Canadian households. I'm still waiting to get mine here. Now, you say they're fighting with banks over how it's being described in our online statements. Tell me more.
Yeah, you pull up your bank statement on your phone or your computer, and you'll see debits and credits. And I don't know about you, but my bank, I sometimes look at something that went out of the account and I say, well, what's that? Or something comes in and okay, I'm not sure. They don't have the best system for labeling everything. And the Trudeau government's frustrated that when the carbon tax or Canadian carbon rebate, I think is what they're calling it, when it shows up, they want that to be what shows up on the line because they want it for marketing purposes. They want you to feel good about the carbon tax, and not many Canadians do right now, let me tell you. And so some of the banks have said, yes, we'll do it. Others are saying it's going to take a while, and others are saying, we don't have to do this for you. It really is the federal government trying to use the banks as part of their marketing scheme. Jean Chrétien was famous for sending Canadians checks, but he made sure it was checks back in the day because, well, back then we didn't have direct deposit in quite the way we do now. But also, you get a little check with the Government of Canada logo and the maple leaf showing up, and you're like, oh, money from the government, and you feel good about the government. It worked for him. Trudeau's hoping that the carbon tax rebate works that way for him, and so far it's not. And part of it is it shows up in your account, and people look at their phone and say, oh, we got $180. I don't know what that's for. Okay, let's spend it.
Brian, there's word now that NDP leader Jagmeet Singh may no longer be in full support of the carbon tax, especially when it comes to the levy being added to our natural gas bills. He's more in support, I guess, of commercial enterprises. Could he potentially pull his support on the coalition with the Liberals that we may see a non-confidence vote and potentially head to the polls sooner than October of next year?
I don't think so for a moment. Look, Jagmeet Singh and the NDP voted for the Conservative motion demanding that the Prime Minister hold a First Minister's meeting, televised First Minister's meeting on the issue of the carbon tax. They did that because they're getting pressure from their own voters who aren't happy with the carbon tax. You've got premiers like Wab Kinew in Manitoba who want rid of the carbon tax, and he's a New Democrat. And so they're feeling a bit of the pinch. So they voted for that. And then there was a couple of stories saying, oh, they're walking away from support of the carbon tax. And Jagmeet Singh quickly ran to the microphones to say, oh, no, we're still all in favor of it. The NDP, look, said earlier, a budget written in orange ink. That's what this Trudeau budget is. It's written in orange ink. They have given the NDP what they wanted. Why would he pull the plug? I'm starting to wonder if Jagmeet Singh's not the real prime minister and Justin Trudeau is the figurehead. I'm only partly joking at that point. But the NDP, this is as good as it's going to get for them, despite the fact that the Liberal support is dropping and Conservatives are doing well. Normally, for the Conservatives to do well and be threatening to win an election, the NDP needs to be strong. The NDP is not strong right now, not in any poll, despite the Liberals, falling apart. The Conservatives are eating all that support. It's not going to get better if Jagmeet Singh pulls the plug and goes to an election now.
Could you potentially see Jagmeet Singh losing his seat in the next federal election? Because a lot of insiders within the NDP that I talked to are not happy with the fact that he's not acting like an opposition leader.
Well, you remember a week or so ago, there were 3 New Democrat MPs that announced on the same day that they wouldn't be running in the next election. So Carol Hughes, Rachel Blaney, Charlie Angus all said on the same day they're not running. That followed 3 other New Democrats who said they're not running in the next election. When your caucus is that small and 6 say they're not running, you've got to imagine that there are problems in the caucus. And part of it is there was a big caucus meeting before those 3 announced about how close they are to the Liberals, that it's not helping them, that Jagmeet Singh is going out there denouncing the Liberal government on a daily basis, saying how awful they are, and then turning around and propping them up and voting for them. And it's annoying a lot of New Democrat voters who say that they are too close to the Liberals. If you talk to dippers, what's their big slogan? Liberal Tory, same old story. They see Justin Trudeau as if he's Pierre Poilievre. And you and I look at Justin Trudeau and say he's going to the left of the New Democrats. It's not helping the NDP. So I could see Singh losing his seat, absolutely. And I could also see the NDP losing far more than just his seat, but many seats across the country. We'll have to wait until a campaign comes along. My 3 sayings about politics: voters are fickle, polls can change, campaigns matter.
That's very true. Brian, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau recently testified at the Foreign Interference Inquiry. Now, you wrote that he was saying one thing under oath and another when questioned by the media. Can you explain?
So there were 2 big things that came out of his testimony. One was he doesn't read his national security briefings. He was asked several times about different briefings. He was asked about details in memos that were sent to him, and he would say, well, I didn't read that. Well, why not? I prefer verbal briefings. The best way to get this to me is to have someone tell me what's happening. Don't send me a memo I may not have the time to read, he said. Multiple times this came up. And then when he was asked about that by a reporter on Friday, they said, are you going to start reading your briefing notes now? He said, I read everything. Well, what is it? You either don't read, which you testified to under oath, or you read everything, which is what you're saying when the cameras are rolling, when the media is there. It can't be both. And yet he wants you to believe it is both. And the other thing was, he said he undermined CSIS repeatedly. He talked about how their evidence wasn't credible. You couldn't take what they said at face value, that you had to interpret all of these things. And then, again, asked by the media, do you have faith in CSIS? Oh, I have absolute trust and faith in CSIS. You can't spend your whole time undermining them and then say you have faith in them. But his 2 objectives going into testifying: 1, give himself plausible deniability. Deny that you saw these things, deny that anyone told them to you, therefore you didn't have to act. 2, undermine CSIS as a credible source. And he accomplished both of those.
Following Iran's attack on Israel this past weekend, there are renewed calls to name Iran's Revolutionary Guard or the Islamic Republic a terrorist entity. Brian, is Ottawa any closer to doing that?
They've been under pressure to do this for years. And as recently as January, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was saying, we're actively examining it. Well, I don't know how long you need to actively examine it. We are now in mid-April. Over the weekend, it was the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps that launched these attacks against Israel. We know that they have been funding Hezbollah. Iran says that their strike on Israel was in retaliation for Israel taking out a top general who's the Hezbollah liaison, who was meeting with them in Syria to plot the attacks of Hezbollah from Lebanon into Israel. We know that Iran funded and trained Hamas for the attacks on October 7th. We know that they fund terrorism around the world, and yet the Trudeau government won't do it. Now, they claim there's a portion of the Revolutionary Guard Corps where there's conscription, and they don't want to get people who are just forced to serve labeled as terrorists. You can still label the organization a terrorist entity. You can still impose greater sanctions, but they seem incredibly reluctant to do so, and I don't understand it. But I'm puzzled by a lot of the Trudeau foreign policy, an arms embargo against Israel at a time when it needs arms to defend itself. Melanie Joly telling Israel, take the win over the attack on the weekend, meaning they didn't hit that many things. So just don't retaliate against a country that just launched hundreds and hundreds of UAVs and drones and missiles into your territory. These guys puzzle me to no end how.
So, Brian, let me ask you something. Where does the Trudeau government stand when it comes to support for Israel right now?
Just lick your finger, stick it up in the air, wherever the wind is blowing, but it's not with Israel. I rolled my eyes when I saw Justin Trudeau put out a statement on the weekend saying, we stand with Israel. No, you do not. I think the Canadian people do, but I do not think that Trudeau does. There's a great piece in the Wall Street Journal the other day. They saw the actual original communique from the G7 leaders who met on the weekend discussing Iran's attack, and they compared it to what came out. And it was a severely watered down statement compared to what the Biden administration had wanted to put out. And the reason is, according to the Wall Street Journal, Canada and Japan helped water it down. They said, oh no, you can't be so strident in your support for Israel. You can't condemn Iran that strongly. This, again, I don't know where this government is going, except basically you have to look at diaspora politics, and you have to look at where are large crowds gathering that the Trudeau government hopes to get votes for. Well, a lot of that are the people who are cheering on Iran, as we saw happen in Toronto. Right after the attacks happened, there were cheers that went up in the crowds of the pro-Hamas protesters that were out in the streets. There were people pledging allegiance to Hamas in Montreal just the other day. Trudeau's hoping for votes from these areas, and so he doesn't want to be too strong. It's really disheartening.
Political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Hal.
Part of the Christian faith is an understanding that God has instructed his followers to share the gospel with others in order to evangelize. Many would argue, however, that it's easier said than done. Joining us today to discuss evangelism in the 21st century is Abe Locke, a retired pastor here in Lethbridge. Abe, welcome back to Bridge City News.
Thank you very much. It's been a while.
Yeah. So why does it seem so difficult for many Christians to share their beliefs with others? Is it maybe our own insecurities?
Well, I have to think of what is the meaning of evangelism. First of all, you see, many of us are confused with the term evangelism, and that's why we don't evangelize. We have evangelists in the past, people like Billy Graham, Billy Sunday, the Satara twins, and the list goes on and on. All the time. These are people that have been specifically called to do evangelism as a full-time thing. But what you're talking about is for us as individual believers to be a so-called evangelists, but we will never be the professional evangelists, and that scares us. And we say, well, I can't do it. These guys have it. They know how to do it. They know their Bible and all the rest of that stuff. And so you're right. We live in fear of sharing because we compare ourselves to these evangelists. God hasn't called us all to be that kind of an evangelist. He wants us to evangelize who we are, where we are, in our circumstances, within the group of people that we live. And I think that makes a big difference to how people respond to the term evangelism.
Now, do we tend to think that our neighbors and coworkers are probably not interested in knowing or hearing about Jesus and His saving grace?
I think we think about that a lot, and that means that we haven't developed a proper relationship with them. If we get a relationship with them on a very comfortable one-to-one basis, so we can begin to talk about anything, then we can also talk about Jesus and about what He means and about our belief system. I often think that we're concerned because we don't know the Bible well enough, and that's very true. But you know, I've discovered one of the things that is most effective in my life as an evangelist, or as somebody who is evangelizing, is the fact that if I share what God has done for me, it's very hard for people to argue with that. It's very hard for them to be put aside by that, because it's my experience. And when people share their experience, others tend to listen and pay attention.
So, Abe, what do you say to someone who thinks that they need to have all of the right answers before sharing about Jesus? Is it that we have to know our Bible, so all of the answers are right in there?
I think one of the problems is that we don't know our Bible. We maybe attend church once a week, and that's the extent of our Bible study. I teach a Bible study every week, and I kind of give homework and reading for the people, because this is an ongoing thing. I cannot expect to talk about farming if I know nothing about farming. I can't expect to be a teacher if I know nothing about how to relate and how to communicate and how to teach. And I think that's one of the big things. We're not sure of what we know. But secondly, I don't think many of us as Christians are sure of what we believe. I have said to my Bible study group, for example, you should work at getting up one sentence to explain your faith. For example, I go back to Paul. What did Paul say? Paul said, we preach Christ crucified, hung on the cross, died, rose again, and is at the right hand of the Father, interceding for us. You've got it in a nutshell. So learn a couple of thoughts like that you can approach a person with, and you'll feel much more secure, and they will know you believe what you're saying.
How about approaching a conversation with a stranger and planting a seed for Christ? How do you really approach that?
Well, I used to, when I was a teacher back then, I used to go golfing every once in a while. And I would go alone deliberately so that they would pair me up with 2 or 3 other people on the course in order to have a group out there. And I loved that, because as we got to go, we would just chatter, and I would eventually ask them what they did for a living and how they could be on the golf course in the middle of the day or whatever. And they would share with me, and invariably, they would feel the pressure to ask me what I did. And I would say, well, I'm a salesman. Oh, what in the world do you sell? And I said, well, I sell the good news, and I sell something that's very special to me. And then I would begin to tell them what the good news is. Would be a natural in for me just to discuss it with them. And sometimes they would simply say to me, I don't want to hear another word. And I would say, well, that's fine. But I just needed to tell you what my belief system is, because we all have one.
Now, what do you say to somebody who tells you, you know what, Abe, I really don't believe in sin?
Yeah, well, I would quote some scripture to them. That's one way. But secondly, I met up with people like this at the university. And I would say, okay, if you don't let me talk about the Bible, that's my basis. And so I'm sorry, we really don't have a baseline to communicate. I said, if you want me to listen to some of the things that you believe in, I'm prepared to do that. However, I expect you then also to respect my belief system so we can have a discussion.
You know, I once had a conversation with someone who didn't know Jesus, and this person said to me, that she didn't believe that Jesus was the only way to our Heavenly Father. She says, you know what, as long as we're good people, God loves us all, we'll end up in heaven. But it even says right in the Bible, no one comes to the Father except through Christ.
That's right. I had a fellow that said to me, well, Mr. Block, I think as long as you're on the bus, you're okay. It doesn't matter which bus you take. And I said, well, would that be good for you to get on any bus if you want to go to California, but it's going up to the Yukon? Well, he said, no, that wouldn't work. And I said, well, it's the same way here. You got to get on the right bus to get to the right destination, or you won't get there.
What are some of the benefits of asking good questions in a conversation with a non-believer?
Very crucial. And I think for me, the key is to build a relationship. If you don't have a relationship, it's like coming in a fog. I mean, the fellow doesn't know where you're coming from, or the person. If you have a little bit of a relationship, at least already, you build up a trust factor. And as you build up a trust factor, they will feel badly if they shut you out. They will let you say a few things at least. And I think it's very crucial to build up a trust factor. I was chairman, for example, of the condo association that we are here. So one of the things I tried to do was let the people know, I love to fix things. If you need help, call me. And that was the beginning of relationships where they trusted to just call me to help them, and that would lead to something else.
Do we, as church-going Christians, perhaps maybe spend a little too much time hanging out with believers, fellow believers? I mean, if we really believe that we should be sharing the good news about Christ, then it stands to reason that we should be making more of an effort to reach out to our community, maybe even volunteer?
Absolutely. You see, the thing is with church, and a lot of people have told me, I don't need the church. I've got the Bible and that's fine. No, I'm sorry. You do need the church. The Bible says very clearly, forget not the gathering of the saints, because that's where our encouragement comes from. That's where our support comes from. However, that's not the battlefield. The church is the place where you learn, where you get encouragement, where you get built up, so that when you do meet the others, and how can you evangelize if you're not meeting with people that aren't believers? Jesus went and met with the sinners. That's where he went. And we can't evangelize unless we have sinner friends with whom we have built a relationship, with whom we can communicate, and then the support of the church and the knowledge of the Bible goes with us as we communicate with them.
Let's talk about fellowship then, about building up other believers and helping to inspire them, especially if they want to go out and evangelize, because no man or woman is an island, right? You need that love and support.
You absolutely do. And I think that God gives us occasions when people say, well, I have no opportunities to talk to non-believers. Wow. God is giving us all kinds of opportunities. We just need to realize them. The other thing I think about is my motto has been, see where God is working and then go and join him. But that takes initiative, and we need to make a decision to do that. And so as we communicate with these people, I think an understanding of where they are coming from is also important. Do I know what they've gone through? Can I relate to the specifics in their life that have been difficult? My present wife and I, we both lost our spouses many years ago. Oh. And you know, it's interesting. When you go through that, it's amazing how people that know that will come and try and communicate with you because they want that encouragement, they want that fellowship, because they know you will understand.
So reaching out to non-believers as well, is it really important to be a sounding board for someone, especially if they're hurting or maybe did lose a loved one, like you just mentioned?
Absolutely. I think, and that's another thing with evangelism. The first thing we have to do is listen. I need to know where people are coming from. I need to understand why they're talking to me the way they are. And if I don't understand that, I'm going to respond in an incorrect way and maybe give them advice that they don't need. I know, for example, I've done a lot of funerals in my life. And one of the things I have experienced from a lot of the people that have talked to me, they've come with the idea, oh, I've had all these people quote scripture to me. I don't want to hear scripture. I want fellowship. I want company. I want somebody to sit with me. I always encourage people, when you are trying to help people like that, don't go and say, give me a call if you have a need. It never works. They're not going to call you. What you do is you go. That's all. You go and knock on the door and bring some food, or you go and you sit with them and cry with them. You just go, because they're going to not respond. And so I think it behooves us to make the move. And you know what? For somebody like me, who is an assertive personality, that's easier than for somebody who's very shy, very inverted and stuff like that. So I don't say it's easy. I just think these are things that we can all work at within how God has created us.
So Abe, what would you list as maybe the top 3 do's and don'ts when it comes to evangelism?
Don't preach. They don't want to hear that. Listen very carefully. And thirdly, share your testimony, which is not a threat. Quoting Bible, and you'll get to that point. You need to. But we often say, well, all you have to do is live a life. That's very important, because you will be the only Bible they will ever read. But eventually, you're going to have to share the gospel with words as well. They go together.
Do you think tracts are still an effective tool for evangelism?
It depends on the area of the world. I know that in some areas of the world, I have heard people are still using tracts. Matter of fact, in some areas, you have these big evangelism meetings still happening. In North America, that's not happening very much anymore, but in other parts of the world, it is. And if it's an appropriate tract, I think it can be very effective. For example, they used to be called the Gideons. They're not that anymore. But I know that they have found new ways. They have a magazine now that they put out. Well, people see the magazine and they take it and they read it, because there's a lot of good stuff in there. But it's not a tract, it's a magazine. And I know that they put out the Gospel of John, and they've got around in our area, and they put them into places that will allow them to be placed. And they're free. And it's amazing how many people will walk into a store and see something that's free and they'll grab it. And I think these kinds of things are very important, to try and put places in place where people are comfortable taking it.
Let's talk about missions trips and evangelizing overseas. How important is that today in the 21st century?
Yeah, good question. It depends, I think, on how it's done. I think we have a lot of groups that go to different parts of the world, especially with young people, and they try and give them experiences and training in evangelism. I think that's an excellent way to do it. There's no better way than get your feet wet in certain areas and begin to share the gospel. I think that's very important. And so I think there are many areas in the world that are still very open to that. I'm not sure it's quite as effective in North America. We have become rather self-sufficient. We don't need God, and so I don't need you is the attitude. I can make it on my own, until they have a catastrophe or an accident or an illness or something. And then all of a sudden, they might sit and listen. So if we find out those things, we can be a part of that. And that's mission work at home, and that can be mission work abroad. And we have a lot of missionaries that are still going out there and meeting people who haven't heard the gospel or don't want to hear it.
You know what I find really interesting as well? When I was a kid, I'd always hear stories about a lot of North American pastors, preachers going out to different countries in Africa to evangelize. Now those African nations are actually sending missionaries back to North America to evangelize. Because like you said, many in North America, it's all about themselves and self-centeredness and taking the focus off of God. So that's very interesting right now.
Yeah, it is. I remember watching television. There's an ad that I hate when I watch television, and it's an ad advertising things for women, facial, et cetera, et cetera. And they always conclude with the comment, and you are worth it. And I'm thinking, that's the concept that we have in our world. We're worth it. So, serve me. It's me, myself, and I. And that's contrary to where the scripture wants us to go.
Yep, you're worth it is an entirely different meaning when you talk about Jesus dying on the cross. We were definitely
absolutely
worth it in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Retired Pastor A. Block, thanks so much for the chat today about evangelism.
You are very welcome. It's a part of my life, and I enjoy it and love it. God bless.
God bless you as well. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. Thanks so much for watching.